by the time this video goes out, this video would have been put out on the channel, but James was here when I made this one, and basically he's left some comments which just made my mind think a little bit more. Let's just go down. He left some comments on there yesterday, so let's get to his comment. It's James. Down here he was going, and then I get down to James's bit here. It says, not invaded at all. Imagine the landmass of the more collective civilization, the rising sea levels being the factor that necessitated the migrations, it's just his word there, migrations, from the lost land. History tells it's an invasion to imply an enemy that was not, as these were of the same tribal group. And it's just, you know, the stories that they've given us, that we were, you know, basically hunted down by the Vikings. And the Vikings weren't the Vikings, were they? They were the Doggerland people trying to get out of the way from their land going. And that's if that's true. But there are trees down there, so that's happened. But, you know, we can only go on what we can see and know, and that's underwater. But that made me think, you know, all the stories they've given us about the Vikings and everything, and how we've been invaded by these people, and they found ships and that. Yeah, but there are other ships down there, probably planes and buildings and machinery and trees and all sorts of other things down there. They don't talk about all those things, they just sort of pick one of them out. There's going to be loads of boats down there probably then. So how could they get to the fact that we were being invaded? It's like, this is what I find really strange is, I know that we've been talking about Doggerland for a while, but it wasn't there, and now it is there. And when you put Doggerland in there with all these people, then things are changing all the time. They're not like they were. And so, you know, yet again, history is just changing yet again. You know, basically. So, you know, this goes on for a little bit further because we've got, I don't know where Ireland is on that. You know, you've got this Doggerland and land around here, and it meets up with France, and, you know, it was much bigger than England. But, you know, whenever they talk about people, or even the video I just did about Russia up north, it was talking of hundreds of thousands are in prison, 18 million are in prison, hundreds of thousands live. It's always so many people. I mean, I think they're trying to tell us there's a lot more people here than there really is or something. But I just thought that was very strange, you know, all those years of being hunted down by the Vikings. Well, maybe they could have done it then. They just come across the land, run, there, I'm in England. Yeah, I just thought that was crazy. There we go. Big Viking expansion. Yeah. I mean, some of the land supposedly went in the first tsunami that happened, well, God knows how many years ago. Sorry, oops, using the wrong word, but used a long time ago. And then there was a couple more that have happened in the meantime afterwards. And so they lost land and they lost more land, and then the rest went with the last one. So maybe then to history it was water that they were coming across. But I don't believe that now. I believe that if those people had to sort of, they just moved. They had to move somewhere. We didn't have passports and all that kind of stuff then. They moved here, but this history will not be right.
Greetings. Before I made this video, I thought this is all very well because this is looking at the past. So how does this benefit me and my spiritual growth? So I'm going to leave answering that over to a subsequent video. I'm just going to focus on the official narrative we're given about history and what that history is potentially showing. So first off, imagine, if you will, try and get the pen in the right place here. you've got this mass, this land mass that encompasses all of Ireland and the British Isles. Basically you have a sea inlet here which goes off into various tributaries which we would know today as the Rhine and the Thames and so on. This land mass comes beyond Ireland and even joins up. There's still a causeway which you can drive over in this area of France. So I want to turn now to the fall of the Roman Empire. So from a search in the internet, the first entry, which comes from US or ushistory.org, it says in 476 Common Era, Romulus, the last of the Roman emperors in the west, was overthrown by the Germanic leader Odoacer, who became the first barbarian to rule in Rome. Checking again with Wiki, that basically says the same thing, and then it also says that the rule in Britain by the Romans ended in 410. Then we have the Saxon invasions, which start in 477. King Aila and his three sons, Valensing, Sissa and Simon, invaded at a place called Selsey, which on this map is just down the bottom here, Selsey Bill, just south of Chichester. Now straight away I see a problem with this, because am I expected to believe that you have this huge population explosion from sort of northern Europe within a year of the end of the Roman Empire? So what I'm suggesting here, based on sort of knowledge I've acquired along the way from numerous sources and also just thinking about things, that this was this huge landmass excuse me, and what we are told are these invasions by the Angles, the Kentite tribe, which is the basis of the origin of the county of Kent, and the Saxons, which gives you South Saxons, Sussex, West Saxons as in Wessex, which is this sort of southwesterly area, Essex, which is the East Saxons, and the Middlesex, which is basically the county which is now the metropolitan county of Greater London. And we're expected to believe that we have these invasions. Now I'm suggesting instead what you have is a migration of people, not an invasion, because they love to flip the script with this. I use the term they just for this purpose, because I'm going to put this into context of spiritual growth in a subsequent video. But this is just piecing together something that I think will make sense and give you a very different view of history. Now I'd refer you to look at the video entitled Black Moon, Void of Course, Proof Roads Went in the Sea, and that's Karen Pettit's The Unscrambled Channel 2. Also on the Sun and Moon Part 2 channel, Tartaria, Doggerland Revisited. Today we talk of we hear on the shipping forecasts on BBC Radio 4. It's also mentioned in a book called Kes, about this young boy who has this kestrel, which was sort of compulsory reading in English at school. But it mentions even in that that's mentioned in the shipping forecast about dogger, fisher and German bite. Now there was this land called Doggerland, which is roughly this part of the North Sea. Pretty much covered all this area. Now I'm suggesting that German Bight is where the sea levels have risen. I'm not going to get into the how they have risen. The thing to bear in mind with all of this, we're not talking like a flood cataclysm in the sense of like a tsunami where the water would then retreat. We're talking about something where today this land is still underwater. I would paint a landscape very much this, what they call the Low Countries, of which the Netherlands or Holland is, and also Cambridgeshire, Norfolk, Lincolnshire. They're very flat, very low level lands, and I would suggest that a lot of this was also very low level. It is said that the seas have risen by 90 metres or 235 feet in that time. I will come on to the time period, which I dispute with the official narrative totally, based on other evidence. Over the last few weeks I've been collaborating with Karen, who is the Unscrambled Channel, Sun and Moon Family United channel. We've covered a huge variety of topics exposing discrepancies with, shall we say, with the official history and the official narrative of things we're given. And I thought I can bring a lot more into this, expand on what has already been said on this. When we just look at what we've got today. I mean, it's said off this coast of Ireland, somewhere roughly about here, is what is called High Brazil, which is only said to be seen every 7 years. And I refer you to the Black Sheep Researcher channel, who's done a fantastic video all about that. Keep in mind as well, Ireland is known as the Emerald Isle. Think of how many times emeralds, emerald cities, emerald tablets, the significance of that. Think also about the official history tells us around about the 1300s that the wealthy sent their children to the island to be educated, and yet today we have all these, there's an Englishman, Scotsman and an Irishman, jokes implying that Irish people are stupid. This is the same history that tells us that the potato famine and white slavery decimated the Irish population, but this same population formed the basis of the manpower to build canals and roads all over the world at the same time. But you can see the flip the script there with the 1 minute Ireland is regarded as the seat of learning, and I think that ties in with the fact that it's also referred to as the Emerald Isle. Then we look at the other things we've got. You've got Iceland here. On the older maps you have a landmass about half the size of Iceland. There's Greenland there. It's roughly about here, called Friesland. Now, in my time collaborating with Karen on 3 channels, the Unscrambled Channel, Sun and Moon Family United channel, I had the pleasure of meeting a few fellow aware and awake people, such as Miriam, who showed us this land causeway said to be built by giants that led from Holland across to Scotland. Now, I can tell you from personal experience that around February time each year, Cambridgeshire, what is known as the Fens area, floods. All the fields go underwater, and then when you're driving on these country roads, you look out the side windows and it's like you're driving across a lake. And I would suspect that this area, as I said, is very much like this. Now, what was shown on that video was this, what appear to be those hexagonal stones like in the giant causeway, which is right over here in Northern Ireland, that it is a structure. Now, Miriam, who is Star Connections video channel, showed photographs of this before it was covered up with sand, creating an artificial beach. And being sort of removed from the Google Earth images in their wonderful updates. But there was proof there, and I will say go and look at that video. Look for Black Moon Void of Course is part of the title, and that's Karen Pettit, The Unscrambled Channel Part 2. Now interestingly, it also talks about this coastal area of Holland being called West Friesland. Now remember, there's the island known as Friesland here. I think we've got to take this whole area into consideration with this. But then when you start looking at what else you've got the Faroe Islands. I mean, what are the chances it shares the same name with a different spelling as an Egyptian ruler? You've got the Hebrides, the Outer and Inner Hebrides. Now, the Heb part, it implies something on the lines of Hebrew to me. I'll come on to a bit more about that when I talk about the aspect of languages with this. Now, I asked Miriam the significance, because we from a UK perspective, we are told that these are Dutch people. They're from Holland, and it's also known as the Netherlands, particularly with anything to do with the European Union. And Miriam mentioned about this land bridge that goes to a place called Niflheim. Straight away I thought of the Wagnerian ring cycle, which is a fusion of German mythology talking about the land of the giants being Nibelheim. Then this picture starts to emerge. Netherland may even be referring to the Netherlands, something perceived as being like hell. Holland could be a corruption of Holy Land. Then you've got Doggerland, maybe God's land. You've got land of the angels, the Angles, the English, the Angel Leash. You've got the Emerald Isle. You've got the Isle of Man, which has appeared because there was no water in this middle part. All this was a land area. So when you start piecing all these things together, a pattern starts to emerge. I also watched a mainstream video on Doggerland, and it's a mixture of truth and lies, obviously. I dispute the timescales, but what it does show is there were a variety of trees that are still underwater, but would those tree stumps be preserved for thousands of years? Because they look comparatively new to me. We also think about there's various tie-ups go on here. Now, in terms of language, for example, Hebrew and Irish and Gaelic share a number of commonality to words. Scotland is said to take its name from Queen Scotia from Egypt. So you've got this Egyptian link coming into this. You have this area attached to Wales, and also Wales is described as Mercia, which is not that far removed in spelling from America. These all seem like little clues to me that point to in a direction. Also ask yourself why England is so said, and yet it is spelt with the letter E, and yet it is pronounced as an I. I also think of a conversation I've had about the Dutch national anthem, in which the words that they sing are we of German blood? Think also Deutschland and Dutchland, how similar those two words are. I would suggest the term German is a deliberate twisted script by this banking dynasty that settles along the Rhine and coming from Switzerland in this sort of hijack of this region of the world. I'm not saying it is Tartaria, But coming back to languages, when I stayed in Sweden, which I stayed roughly sort of halfway on the north-south line, there's a older version of Swedish that is perfectly understood in Iceland, which again hints to a commonality of culture. And like I've said, I think we're not looking at Saxon and Viking invasions. I don't think we're all the invasions by the Angles from this area of Denmark, Jutland, and this northern European area. I think what we're looking at is a migration of people as the water levels rose. Also, I would suggest that this Hadrian's Wall and the other wall that are in place, you would probably find remains going right across, linking up to what we know as the Great Wall of China today. I feel that that is a defensive position of an invader coming from the south, which I refer to as the Sea People, because they remain unseen. They're mentioned in sort of official narrative of history, attacking various civilizations in the Mediterranean. Nobody seems to know who they are, where they came from, and what happened to them. And I think they hide behind many masks and have many names, many secret organizations, and so on and so on. So also, when we look at the spread of the Rh negative blood, it's predominantly in the Basque region. I think it's about 35% from the figures I've seen, and you can follow a path that goes all the way up through the Gaelic speaking, what is known as the Celtic tribal land. So that's sort of Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, the west coast of England. But then there's also something else, the Catalonian traditional dance, the Highland fling, the traditional dances of Ireland and even Latvia show a commonality to this entire region of the peoples. So I think what they've done, they've spun a very different story upon humanity. Now, when we're talking of timescales, this is where the astrology comes into this. When you have a Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, the indication is that it is a change of power. So when we look around the 1620s, you've got the beheading of Charles I, King of England. Then the next one, you have 1812, you have an assassination of a British Prime Minister, you have the Napoleonic Wars. I'll come back to that in a moment. You have the earthquake in Mexico. You have the war in North America between what became subsequently Canada and the United States, all going on at the same time. But if we put this in today's context, the UK is said to have a population of around 66 million. France is roughly half that. So if we go back to the time of Napoleon, as told by this official narrative, are you telling me that out of that, say 35 million people, how many of that were men of eligible age to serve in an army that would go all the way down to Egypt and to Russia? How thinly dispersed would this French army have been to sort of take over all of Europe? The whole thing seems implausible. There are some strange events. Now, one thing I will say from my own experience of doing family history, with regard to the timescale, I looked at Selsey and read in various old books in records offices as part of my research about the coastline around Selsey losing 2 miles. Even today, it's said that on this south coast it's very shallow and goes out quite a long way, but then there's a sudden drop which would account for the rising sea levels. That's in the last 200 years. So I can't see that if the sea levels rose here, would they not have rose here at the same time? Doggerland could be between the sort of 400 200 year mark as well. So I don't think history is quite what we're shown. You also have to take into account parish registers. They show little hint of anything remotely political or anything unusual. There is no real implication apart from mention of men who are getting married being members of various militias at the time of the Napoleonic Wars. But there's very little hint of an English civil war in the earlier registers. There are one or two exceptional events that are marked down, in particular one I read in an Amberley parish register, Amberley being in Sussex, talking in the July of 1839 of these hailstones. So we're talking in the middle of the summer of that year, with a diameter between 4.5 and 9 inches. So we're talking things the size of tennis balls. And it just mentions about a lot of destruction of glass houses. What I find almost inconceivable with history, on the way we're told, 2,000 years ago, Joseph and Mary are going to Bethlehem because of a Roman census. Perhaps famously, the most well-known census would be the Domesday Survey between 1066 and 1086, when William the Conqueror has this new land. And it would make sense, you would want to know what you've got in that land, how many ox, how many people, what manpower, what resources you've got. So you would want a survey or a census done. But then nothing until an attempt in 1821 and 1831 for England and Wales, which had huge problems with it. But by 1841 they had devised routes so 25,000 enumerators would all go out on the same day and everybody would be recorded on this register. Also, bearing in mind, you have tithe maps, which are always done by accredited to people of military rank, and so where they will plot out individual parishes, the shapes of every field within an area. To me, all this is saying stock taking. Then you have the civil registrations coming in, where it's taken away from the church and the power is given over to government. It's gone from religion to state. It ties in with this astrological conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, the change of power. I would also suggest that, going on the premise that there is a creator that created everything and therefore created its own opposition to play this game and test out its creation, that the opposition side would imitate that, and again it would offer its own opposition, which I think is why you have the Masonic dividers playing two sides, which you can see in politics, particularly with red and blue parties, the red shift, the blue shift, the eternal battle of fire and ice being displayed right there, which would also explain the whole Napoleon and royal families that look to be two opposing sides, and an enormous theatre of war that you can then entirely rewrite history and give a completely false narrative for. I also think of looking at, through doing family history, becoming self-taught in secretary hand. For those of you that don't know what that is, if you go back to the 16th and 17th century, there is a style of writing which suggests almost an element of Hebrew in its flowing style, an element of runic. To the modern eyes it looks very strange, but it doesn't take long before you become accustomed with how to read it when you see what letters are changed. The letter, what looks like a letter R is a C, for example, and H looks like a Y to modern eyes. But again, it's difficult to determine what picture is being shown, because the parish registers do look to be consistent. But just because I'm holding something that is an original manuscript, my judgment on it being an original manuscript is based on information that the system has given me in the first place. So I don't know that to even be true. So I remain open. But imagine what this would have looked like. How different it would be. But again, I draw your attention to these names of Holland, Holy Land, the Netherlands, which would be like hell. Actually, funny enough, there is a place in Sweden actually called Hell. You have the Doggerland, built by the Niflheim or the Nibelheim, the giants. So that's implying land of the giants. The Giants' Causeway as well is another reference to it. You've got the Emerald Isle, Land of Angels, Anglia, Scotia, Scotland, Iceland, Friesland, West Friesland. To me, this is all implying a very different history and showing a very different perception on what we've been told and the evidence that supports it or does not support it. So it's a fascinating topic, but it comes back to that question: how does that benefit me? In this reality, you have three parts. You have body, mind, and soul, or body, mind, and spirit. It seems with the way current events are going, they are trying to separate off the spirit and leave just the mind and the body. Well, here you have the physical play out with the rising sea levels and the migrations of populations and changing things. But this time it's a different type of flood. It is a flood of information. A lot of it is misleading information. I'm not saying that what I'm suggesting is 100% true or accurate. I'm just drawing conclusions from various bits of information, trying to offer a plausible answer and a timescale to it. But because it is such a twisted story, imagine, if you will, you are given a pack of cards back. They were all in number order, in suit order. Now they have been shuffled up and handed back to you, and that is what is presented to you with history, which is a real mystery. So the question comes to, how does that benefit my spiritual growth? Because if I can see how a physical thing using a certain set of tactics is played out, and then how that is equated in playing it out as an attack on the mind, it gives me a certain sort of inner standing of things don't seem so fearful, because your perceptions change on these things and you see them in a new light, shall we say. Always clues in these words, in this etymology of it all. So what else have we got to cover here? Actually, I think I have mentioned everything. Yes, I think we're looking, just to sum up, I think we're looking at no more than a 400-year time period for all of this to be been achieved. How was it done? That is the other question. I would suggest that astrology plays a huge part in this. I would suggest that a secret knowledge, a wisdom that was intended to be shared with humanity, has been squirreled away, as suggested in the Anastasia books, by a secret priesthood who are manipulating things to be self-serving, creating their own version of collective. Now this collective is just of, say, 8 priests instead of a collective of all of humanity. So again, it is showing to me that you have a truth that has been twisted and then been played out in a physical reality, in this reality. So I know there's rather a lot in this video, but it's just basically offering you an explanation on an alternative history that is suggested about Anglo-Saxon invasions and Viking invasions. I see a very different picture based on the information I have talked about in this video. But for now I will say in Lakesh and Aloha and Tata for now.